I am Faida Tota, and it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of PCAP to this webinar with our guest, Huwaida Arraf, who will be in conversation with Jonathan Kuttab. But first, Reverend Fahid Abu Aqil, also of PCAP, will lead us in a moment of silence and then prayer. Reverend Fahid?
Let us begin with a time of silence as we remember those children, adults who died and injured in Gaza and other places. Amen. Let us pray. Loving and caring God, yes, you are the God of justice, peace, and freedom. We pray for the stop of war against the Palestinian people, the Iranian, the Sudanese, Somalis, and other people around the world. God of mercy, we are 10,000 miles away and we do not see the pain and suffering of the Palestinian people under a brutal Zionist military state. During this Lenten season and Holy Ramadan, help us to reflect and work harder more than ever before for the stop of the war today. Lord, help us to remember the words of James, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruit, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Today, we thank you for PCAB officers and board of directors. We thank you for all our supporters and the people who are attending this webinar. Loving God, open the doors of our churches all over the USA for us as Palestinian American Christian to share our faith story and the story of our people. Help us to hear from our speaker what is going on, and at the same time, help us to dedicate ourselves to do some action step. In your name we pray. And all the people said, Amen.
Amen.
Amen. A little about PCAP. It's the Palestinian Christian Alliance, the Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace. We are a non-sectarian ecumenical alliance of Palestinian American Christians seeking to provide a clear voice and presence in faith-based communities in the United States. Our inspiration stems from Cairo's Palestine document and from all faith-based communities working for peace through justice in Palestine and Israel. We believe that achieving peace requires ensuring justice and human rights for Palestinians. American churches, church bodies, and church-based organizations can and ought to play a leading role in advocating for a just peace among all people in the region. For more about PCAP, please check our website. And if you can help to support our work, there is also a donation link. Today's co-sponsor of the event is FOSNA. We also have the Council on American Islamic Relations, Episcopal Peace Fellowship, Palestinian Justice Network, Jewish Voice for Peace, DC Metro, Unitarian Universalist for Justice in the Middle East, and Jewish Voice for Peace, Philadelphia. As we begin today's event, a few reminders. Please use the chat for questions. All of you are muted. If you would like to speak, the host will allow you to speak. And you can decide whether you want to keep your camera on or not. Before I introduce our guest today, Philip Farah of PCAP would like to say a few words about the recent passing of Reverends Jesse Jackson and Graylin Hagler. Philip?
Salam, everybody. Also, please, if you feel like it, keep the chat as much as possible for questions, but you can post where you are located. Um, I'm so glad we at Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace and Friends of Sabeel USA are hosting Huwaida Arraf. She is a longtime friend, and I have always looked up to her as a hero. A precursor of PCAP, the Washington Interfaith Alliance for Peace, hosted Ms. Arraf as a keynote speaker for one of the first conferences in the US for Sabeel 20 years ago. I also want to take a few minutes to eulogize two great friends of the Palestinian people who passed away. They happened to pass away on the same day, on the 17th of this month. Reverend Jesse Jackson and Reverend Graylin Hagler. Both were readily willing to speak for just peace in Palestine, Israel, long before it was fashionable. I met Reverend Jackson the first year that I immigrated to the US at Operation Push in Chicago in 1978. He personally introduced several speakers on different issues on the program that day, and I was speaking on behalf of Sami Ismail campaign, calling for the release of this young Palestinian who was being tortured in Israeli prisons. Reverend Jesse Jackson never shirked from speaking truth to power. Reverend Graylin Hagler passed away the same day here in Washington, D.C. He also never turned us down when we and other peace and justice organizations, invited him to speak on justice for the Palestinians. This is at a time when hardly any other church leaders responded to our calls. May Jesse Jackson and Graylin Hagler rest in peace and power.
May they
Uh,
rest in power.
I also wanted to thank Jacob Sierra for stepping up and Jacob Sierra of the FOSNA board for stepping up and helping us with this Zoom. Thank you.
And now to our program, and it's my privilege to introduce Huwaida Arraf, who has a long history with PCAP in its earlier incarnations. Huwaida Arraf is a Palestinian American civil and human rights attorney and a social justice activist. She has been involved in legal, political, and grassroots initiatives for Palestinian rights for the last 2 decades, including co-founding the Nobel Peace Prize nominated International Solidarity Movement and leading the Free Gaza movement, which beginning in 2008 organized sea voyages to Gaza to confront and challenge Israel's illegal blockade on the 2 million people living there. Huwaida currently practices civil rights law in Detroit, where she also resides with her husband and 2 children. Huwaida was the 2022 candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives for Michigan's 10th Congressional District and is an elected member of the Michigan Democrat Party's State Central Committee. She will be in conversation with Jonathan Kuttab, who is co-founder of the Palestinian human rights group Al-Haq and co-founder of Nonviolence International, a well-known international human rights attorney. Jonathan practices in the U.S., Palestine, and Israel. He also serves on the board of Bethlehem Bible College and is president of the board of the Holy Land Trust. Jonathan was the head of the legal committee negotiating the Cairo Agreement of 1994 between Israel and the PLO. After graduating with his Doctor of Jurisprudence from the University of Virginia Law School and practicing a couple years on Wall Street, Jonathan returned home to Palestine. Jonathan was a visiting scholar at Osgood Law School at York University in Toronto in the fall of 2017 and is a founding director of Just Peace Advocates Movement pour un Paix Juste, a Canadian-based international law, human rights, not-for-profit organization. Jonathan is currently the executive of Friends of Sabeel, North America, FOSNA. And now on to our program.
Here it is. Well, hello, everybody. It's good to see you all on this very momentous morning. I'm afraid at a real serious level, we are being upstaged by the events this morning of Israel and the United States attacking Iran and starting what may be a short or a long campaign of violence in the whole area. I just heard word that the Straits of Hormuz have been closed. So this is clearly going to be more than just a quick strike and it's over. This may well be the beginning of a much longer period. But maybe also precisely because of this, it's very important that we hear from Huwaida, who presents an entirely different perspective, an entirely different worldview than the one that's dominated by missiles and drones and destruction. I don't see Huwaida's picture. Maybe it's just my screen. Huwaida, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me? Hear me?
Now I can see you.
Okay.
Huwaida, it's so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. It is really an honor to be with you always, Jonathan, with PCAP, with everyone here. I see some familiar faces, people that I've worked with, organized with over the years. And I so appreciate the work of all of the organizations that co-sponsored this and are bringing us together. So definitely the honor is mine. And I just wanted to comment and thank my brother Philip for, honoring the two prophetic Christian leaders, Reverend Jesse Jackson and Reverend Graylin Hagler, who left us. These were two Christian leaders who understood that faith demands solidarity beyond borders. They were unwavering in their solidarity. They spoke truth to power. Some of you may know that Reverend Jesse Jackson in his presidential campaigns in 1984 and 1988 made Palestinian self-determination a part of his presidential platform. So he was speaking about Palestinian liberation when it was taboo to speak about Palestine. So it's a huge loss for us to lose both of these towering figures on the same day. But may their memories be a blessing and a continued call to action for us all. And as you noted, Jonathan, action is so very much needed, not only for Palestine, but against this increasingly dangerous attempt to eviscerate any kind of respect for law. You said that I imagine or see a different world. I see the world that we deserve to live in. I see us being far from there now, but I do see us making strides, and hopefully we'll talk about that because, yes, we woke up to another illegal, and there's no question it's absolutely illegal attack on Iran by the US and Israel, not only under international law, but US law. One of the strikes was directly hit a girls' school, killing dozens. The last number I heard was 70 school children. And, this unprovoked aggression took place during diplomatic relations, the second time the United States uses diplomatic negotiations as a cover for readying to launch military strikes. And of course, now we see Iran also retaliating in the region, which is going to lead to escalation. So this latest assault on yet another sovereign nation, it underscores why rising global solidarity, which is the title of this program today, is not just necessary, it's so extremely urgent. Because when powerful nations ignore international law, which is what's been happening, and launch wars of choice, when they can get away with genocide, the entire world becomes less safe. And I know that's a world that none of us wants to see. So a long way of saying thank you for bringing us together here today, and the honor is all mine to be with you.
Well, let me develop this a little bit more. I mean, you're a lawyer and I'm a lawyer, and we're in the field of international law. But many activists uh, have been told basically that international law is meaningless, that it's only the powerful who can use international law when it's in their interest, and when it's not in their interest, they can ignore it. Please address this point, because international law actually developed, and a lot of it developed after World War II, when people saw how horrible war can be and how the weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, destructive weapons, and they say we don't want to live in a world where whoever's got powerful weapons can use them. So they established the principles of international law in the interest of everybody. What happens when international law collapses? When it's no longer a reference point, when it's no longer a universally accepted set or architecture for international relations, what happens then? Is this the kind of world that we are moving in?
It's where certain powers want us to move, certainly. And, I myself went into international law after my experience in Palestine. So I graduated college here. I thought I was going to go into diplomacy and political science and help play a role in shaping the future of Palestine, peaceful relations, etc. I moved to Palestine to work on, developing. At the time, we were in a so-called peace process, but I quickly saw that the peace process was a farce and a cover for continued settler colonial expansion and continued domination of the Palestinian people. And that's when I and others co-founded the International Solidarity Movement. And after years of just seeing horrors in front of my eyes, which was a shock to me, honestly, because not just because of the horror of it all and not believing that a system like this could exist in the 21st century, supported by a country that I grew up in, that my parents immigrated to because of the freedoms that it would provide us compared to living under occupation in Palestine. So I kind of grew up with this naive view of the United States as this purveyor of freedom, justice, democracy, all of that stuff. It was a rude awakening. But what it prompted me to do is to go into the law, because the law, right? There has to be some way for victims of human rights abuses to get justice. There has to be some way to hold these perpetrators of crimes against humanity accountable. And what I learned is something along the lines of what you're saying today, but maybe not all that pessimistic. The law, and especially international law, because we don't have a global police force or a way of implementation, we depend on states to implement, right? And if states don't implement, then you have a kind of a crisis of the law, and where and that's really what we've been seeing. You noted that post World War II, the international community made some declarations about we never want to see this kind of carnage again, and establishing a world order based on, respect for the law and human rights and self-determination, all of these things. But they also established a system with the UN Security Council that gave the victors and the five permanent members
Veto power.
a veto power that has served to play into the interests of powerful states, as you said. But law in itself, the international law also developed as a result, was developed by imperial colonial states, and it served these purposes until this period that you're talking about, and more so in the decolonization period of the 60s and the early 70s. That's when we see a rise in the power of newly decolonized states in the global south, and we see some wins for international law and this perspective that we are moving towards a world where international law can be applied, can safeguard people's rights and peace throughout the world. But we still had the manipulation of the powerful. And so what does that call upon us to do? If we want the implementation of international law, and we know that states are the enforcers, we need to use our power as global citizens to force our states to respect the law. And this is why global action is so powerful, because if we don't use the power that we have in the states that are most violating the law, then we are allowing them to get away with it. And what we see today is Trump, Israel, and other cohorts are really trying to move us to a place where there is no international law. They talk about the rules-based order collapsing. The rules-based order has always been about the rule where the powerful gets to dictate when the law applies and to who, and they always exempt themselves. That is the rules-based order, and that's what they want it to be. So in a sense, there's no collapse of the rules-based order. Those are the rules. What we want is a global order that is based on international law that respects people across the board, that there are no people that get away with violating the law. And that comes back to us, because that's not going to happen on its own. It's not going to happen on its own. And we see a rising attempt of just abusing the law in the most horrific ways. So that is another call to action for us. So yes, it looks a little bit bleak, but we have a role to play, and we must.
Let me develop this point a little bit more. International law now sets certain standards. They are universal standards. They, in theory, apply to all states. When states violate these laws, either the Security Council, which has the power under Chapter 7 to do something about it, acts. But if it doesn't, then it falls back on ordinary citizens, civil society, to force their governments to act according to these principles. Now, a very clear example is what's happening today. This very day, the vast majority of the American people don't want a war with Iran. The US Constitution says it's the Congress, not the president, who has to start a war. The polls indicate over 80% don't want any action against Iran. That's unprovoked. That's a war of choice rather than defense. But Trump decides, I'm going to do it. And Israel decides, we're going to do it. And this is a wonderful time. Our enemy is weak. We can just go and hit them, and come what may. What can ordinary people do about this?
Yeah, well, as I noted to you before we started this webinar, there are protests being planned across the country. One in Detroit. I might not make it because of this webinar, but certainly I'll be at others. And it's not, I think we need to be flooding the streets. We need to be flooding our phone lines. Members of Congress, Democratic members of Congress, some of them are speaking out because, as you noted, this is a violation of U.S. law. Congress has
Right.
it's in the purview of Congress to declare war. So we need to, unfortunately, Democrats are a minority, and therefore measures brought forward by Democrats may not succeed unless we ensure through our voicing our objections, being at the doorstep of our representatives, our Republican as well as Democratic representatives, to get them to move and to stop this president. Nobody wants a war. It's unjustified. There is no threat whatsoever, and we cannot continue allowing this president to wreak this havoc on not only on in the region, in the Middle East, across other Africa and other countries, exploiting and killing people, but also using our tax dollars while Americans are suffering in order to do so. While I continue to read reports about how people can't afford rent or groceries anymore, and yet we always have money for war. But if we don't make our voices more heard, we are really in trouble. And that is such I think will be a stain on the American people. And if some of us are listening to kind of our colleagues and friends in other countries, they're marveling at how and why the revelations, for example, in the Epstein files have not sparked more of an outrage in the United States. Like, what are we doing here in the United States? It's called political upheaval for things much less in other countries, right? It's threatening the Starmer government because of an appointment of an official who had ties, but some more direct relationships and crimes here in the United States by U.S. citizens and by our officials have resulted in no resignations, no prosecutions, and not even, massive U.S. citizen outcry as to what's happening. And that just cannot be where we are, and that cannot be the reflection of who we are. So I really hope that I realize that in a sense, I'm speaking to people who are not those who are silent, those people who are working, but I think the urgency is that much more dire, and we need to communicate this. As information is so available to us about what's happening, there's just no excuse, and there's no excuse for our silence. If your next door neighbor or whatnot doesn't want to worry about what's happening thousands of miles away, worry about what that means for you, not only because your tax dollars are being used now, but because we are moving into this world that is controlled by oligarchs and dictators and wannabe emperors. And that's, is that the world you want your children to grow up in? So that is I think a very stark message and call to action. But as dire maybe as that seems, the situation that we're in, I think one of the things we talked about, we wanted to bring out in this webinar is this global rise in solidarity against genocide and the wins that the movement has had. Because so many of us see the horrors every single day we're watching. There's devastation on an unimaginable scale. And we think, like, how can this happen? I know when probably none of us imagine that something like this can happen, where there could be a live stream genocide and over 2 years and we haven't managed to stop it. I know when I used to do some of my activism in Palestine or trying to sail to break the siege of Gaza, I thought maybe naively that if only the world could get past US Israeli propaganda, then the world would mobilize to stop Israel, because this is unlawful, this is inhumane. And the world knows now, and 2+ years we haven't been able to stop a genocide. So these horrors can make us feel maybe a little bit disempowered. But I feel like if we only speak about the suffering and how we haven't been able to stop a genocide, then we miss something that is critically important. We miss the resistance, all of the organizing, and a clear global shift that's underway. Especially over the past couple of years, we have witnessed, not only horror, but historic gains for the Palestinian rights movement that didn't just start since, October 7th, 2023. It's a result not only of the gravity of the horrors that we have been witnessing, but years and years of concerted and principled organizing. And we are seeing this shift. And so I think it's really important to focus a little bit on that, because we rarely do focus on these wins, and because as a movement, I think we need clarity, and we need to see where we are winning, and that we are winning, right?
Okay. Hold on a second. Before I get to the wins, which are very important, and I think we need to spend some time on giving people specific wins. Before I get to that, I want to move things up a little. From we need to speak out, we need to demonstrate, we need to write petitions, but there's also some specific tools of nonviolence that can, in fact, impact the situation, but which require a little bit more commitment, a little bit more risk, a little bit more involvement. So I want you to talk a little bit about the flotilla and about the use of actual active civil disobedience, actual active presenting ourselves and joining the fight in a nonviolent way against those who are simply ignoring international law totally. So please tell us a little bit about the flotilla and about the tools of nonviolence that can in fact be very effective beyond just merely protesting, raising our voice, signing a petition, or even joining a demonstration.
Yes, thank you for that opening, because I definitely wanted to make time to talk about what we are working on now, which is the largest flotilla to confront and challenge Israel's blockade to break the siege, but it is intended to be more than that, which I'll talk about. But before I do, I just want to start off, for those of you who might not know, this civil society attempt to use nonviolent direct action to break Israel's illegal naval blockade started in 2008. The first boat I sailed on was in 2008, and I was one of 46 people on two small fishing boats. And it seemed crazy, but we said we are going to challenge the Israeli Navy and we are going to get to Gaza because the people of Gaza have a right to receive us. Israel's naval blockade is illegal, and our governments are not upholding international law. Israel tells everybody that the measures that they take are always about security. And this is the naivete I had back then. It was, we didn't expect to actually get to Gaza, in our two small fishing boats with Israel saying like, no way, they're enforcing their naval blockade. But we said, well, either, if we're not going to get to Gaza, then Israel's going to attack us in the middle of the sea, and then it will be clear to the entire world that their blockade and their policies have nothing to do with security. It's about collective punishment, punishing an entire civilian population, exacting political concessions, all things that are unlawful, inhumane. Then maybe, the world wouldn't let Israel get away with it. So that was the strategy. We're going to expose that Israel's policy has nothing to do with security. Make a long story short, at the last minute while we were at sea, Israel backed down, and those two small fishing boats became the first in history to make it to Gaza in over 40 years of Israeli occupation without Israeli permission, because Israel controls everything and everyone that gets in and out of Gaza. And when we left Gaza in August of 2008 on our fishing boat, the same way that we came in, we promised the people of Gaza that it would not be just a one-time action, that we would continue to sail until we effectively opened a sea route to Gaza. And that's what we were going to do. And we did sail 4 more times back and forth to Gaza, with Israel not daring to confront us at sea. And we were able to take in people who Israel were keeping out, including journalists and doctors, and take out of Gaza. Again, we had just very small vessels, so it was only a small number of people, but people who needed urgent medical care, or care to improve their quality of life, which Israel does not think is reason enough to allow people to leave this big prison that they're in. For example, one of the first people we took out was a 16-year-old boy, Said, who had his leg amputated because of an Israeli military operation in his neighborhood of Gaza, leg amputated from the hip down. And Israel would not let him go into Israel to get the prosthetic that wasn't available in Gaza, and it would not let him go to any other country. He was just trapped with no way to kind of improve his mobility and life. And Israel was doing that to so many people who needed even more urgent medical care. So people were dying. So we were able to take a few people out on our boats. But at the end of 2008, Israel started hitting our boats. And in 2010, we grew from 1 and 2 small boats to a flotilla, and Israel launched a lethal attack on our flotilla, actually killed 10 of our members, international volunteers who were on the flotilla. So much impunity that has come along with what Israel has done. I mean, we know that Israel has gotten away with what it's done to Palestinians for decades, but also in its attack and killing of internationals, Israel has seen it's not going to face any consequences. So it continues. But even though the threat on international civilians had increased, we did not want to give in to, this military might is right. We know that nonviolent direct action is not safe. And we determined that we would keep going. Like, this violence is not going to stop us. And we continued to sail, but Israel, unfortunately, a lot of countries were colluding with Israel in the years that followed. And so some countries were actually blocking us from leaving Greece or Turkey or Cyprus. The urgency to sail and break the siege, of course, after the genocide, and we saw that Israel's blockade was being used as a tool of the genocide to engineer starvation and famine. We said that, we have to organize something huge. And we did start to work on that in 2024. It was the spring of 2024. We had 3 large vessels, and one of them was filled with thousands of tons of life-saving aid. But we were faced with bureaucratic sabotage. Our flags were pulled, and Turkey wouldn't let us leave. Skip ahead to 2025. We managed in June to get out 1 small boat, not the 3 large boats or the thousands of tons of aid that we had, 1 small sailboat that only carried 12 people. But it was a strong message that we're not going to stop, that Yes, when our governments are failing to stop a genocide, 12 people on a sailboat are going to go try to get to Gaza and stop this genocide, going to confront the Israeli Navy because we need that. And that what ended up happening is sparked a lot of people's imagination and interest. And so within a couple of months, we had dozens of boats at sea going to Gaza. Of course, we were all attacked. Our governments did nothing to uphold our rights, which is one of the things that we're exposing. But again, we declared we're not stopping. And now, with all of these new organizations that now want to agree that we need to engage in this global uprising and nonviolent direct action in this way, we're planning in April a huge flotilla. We expect at least 100 ships and hopefully
Wow.
thousands of people at sea. And in the US, I really wanted to have a huge impact in the US too. And the only way, there is something to be said for sure about the people who leave the comforts of their home and their families and get on those boats. But it has never been about the power is not just in those boats, because without the support of people around the world sharing information, calling their members of Congress, protesting, vigil. If you saw back in the summer, Italian dock workers and unions were shutting down, docks were shutting down their cities in support of the flotilla, saying, Italy must demand that the U.S. or that Israel not attack those ships. We're working now to increase that, to outreach to more unions so that when those boats set sail, there's global action on land in every country to support it. There will be a simultaneous land convoy, and people can get involved. Again, people can apply to be on the ships for sure, but I think the strongest way to get involved is in your local community. What can you do locally to actually support, to be in conjunction with the sailing, to show not only that we reject the genocide and we need to break the siege, but it's a global uprising against this new world order that, again, the US and Israel and their cohorts are trying to impose on us, where law doesn't matter and people's lives don't matter unless you are a wealthy billionaire. So I really see it as an opportunity to show this massive global civil society uprising against where these corrupt leaders are taking us. So I will, if most people here are in the United States, I'll put a link in the chat. It's just
Please.
an endorsement form where you can endorse the flotilla, and what that'll do for the US team is give us your contact information, and within a week to 10 days we hope to hold a meeting where we can strategize and try to set plans on what all these different organizations can do on the ground, whether it's calling campaigns, sharing information, local protests, shutdowns, etc.
So there are very specific things that can be done. My point is, many people think nonviolence is simply refraining from shooting or killing or bombing. They don't realize that there are a lot of tools and a lot of tactics, a lot of organization, a lot of activities, a lot of discipline, a lot of resources that are needed for a whole way of waging peace, of waging law and waging respect for human rights that is not based on killing or shooting somebody, but that also still requires a lot of effort. And there have been some successes. Now we can talk about the wins, because one of the things that I run into all the time are activists who have despaired, who feel frustrated, who feel that they are overwhelmed, that the forces of evil seem to have the upper hand. They're getting away with it. They're literally getting away with murder. They're getting away with genocide, and they're succeeding. And that everything we have done, we have tried, we have marched in the streets, we haven't moved the needle. So what do you tell these people? Give us some of the signs of hope, some of the victories, even small victories that show that it's worthwhile for us to continue.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. When I first moved to Palestine in the in 2000, we had to struggle just to have people understand that it's an occupation and not its, and not its disputed territory or whatnot. And now it's not people, I think, are more even starting to understand that it's not occupation is just one symptom of what's happening. This is an entire settler colonial project. So we've seen a shift in understanding and the depth of understanding, a shift in the narrative. That's just on a simple level, but a very important level. But other things that used to, again, be taboo or we never thought we would see are becoming more and more common. Of course, we can talk about all of the wins, literally hundreds of wins of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And there is instead of going through all of them, I couldn't because literally there are over 1,000. They're visualizing Palestine. Some of you might know of that organization and teamed up with the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement and have a great resource. Unfortunately, it's only until 2024, but it lists almost all of the wins from 2005 to 2024 of examples of from like state funds divesting from Israeli bonds to universities cutting off ties to big corporations also that have cut ties with Israel. We've seen because of global pressure on economics on big companies, we've seen huge international companies that have cut relationships, divested, pulled out of Israel because Puma being one of them. We saw
What's that
Intel.
again?
Sorry?
What's that again?
Oh, Puma, the
Puma.
sports brand, Puma that used to sponsor an Israeli settler football team, but there was a massive global pressure and they ended their contract. Intel, we know that they were supposed to expand a $25 billion factory in Israel but in mid 2024, they scuttled those plans. We have Veolia. They were building the light rail in Israel. They operated some buses in settlements. This is a French company, but because they were losing other contracts, billion-dollar contracts, because of civil society pressure and the exposure about their role in the occupation, Veolia pulled out. G4S, an international also security company, has pulled out with some of its investments with Israel again because it was losing investments elsewhere because people were saying locally that we don't want any kind of relationship with these companies that fund and that support and participate in apartheid and genocide and so many other examples of that. Just 2 days ago, Jonathan, the organization that you helped, I think I didn't know in your bio, helped co-found the Just Peace Advocates, Just Peace Activists, noted that the Canadian Revenue Service just deregistered two Zionist organizations that these Zionist organizations, and in the United States, this is rampant, but they register as these charities and they use the non-taxable status in order to raise funds that they then funnel to settlers and the Israeli military. So
Correct.
two more were just deregistered yesterday, and last year, a huge one, the Jewish National Fund in Canada was deregistered. Unfortunately, the Jewish National Fund still is registered as a charity in the United States, but there should be something, that we do about that. So there are these levels of kind of BDS kind of wins, but if we look at also on the political level, right, we have like never before in Congress debating an arms embargo on Israel. Activists and supporters of not only supporters of Palestinian rights, but people who are horrified by the genocide made an arms embargo on Israel, a central part of the 2024 campaign. And unfortunately, we see now the Democratic Party that did an autopsy type of report about their, the 2024 campaign. They're refusing to release it. There are demands now for them to release the report to say why they lost. And we suspect because, the support for Israel may not be the number one thing that caused Kamala Harris to lose, but for sure it's in there. For sure it's in there. And we know, unfortunately, that there are still elements within the Democratic Party and the corporate establishment that does not want further scrutiny on the Democratic Party's relationship with Israel. But we know because the Institute for Middle East Understanding did a poll that they personally went to the Democratic National Convention in August to hand to the Democratic Party leadership. That poll said that the result of that poll was that for every vote that Kamala Harris might lose if she came out in support of an arms embargo, she would gain 5 to 7 votes. For every vote that
Wow.
she would lose, she would gain 5 to 7. And that report was handed to the highest leadership of the Democratic National Convention, and they ignored it. And they
They
ignored it.
buried it.
Yep, it is. So they have, and they seem like they want to continue going along the same routes and continue to kind of ignore what their base is telling them. But there's a lot of work being done at the base. There are so many examples I could give you, but I could tell you briefly, the some people have talked to me about, well, look at the encampments on the universities, they've died down and students are being prosecuted. Maybe, yes, students are being prosecuted unjustly, but we're also winning. Just yesterday, a New York court handed down a decision that reversed all of the punitive measures taken against the Columbia students that occupied Hinds Hall, because you have attorneys that are volunteering their time and that are pooling their resources in order not only to defend students, but to file proactive actions. Like, I'm part of a legal team that is suing the University of Michigan for violating the civil rights of those students who protested. But the students who protested, because there are like less protests now, that doesn't mean that they have stopped their work at all. In fact, the students who led the University of Michigan, where I'm in Michigan, encampments, then started strategizing to try to elect people to the University of Michigan Board of Regents. And I was their candidate last year. It was a very short, quick campaign. We only had 3 weeks to campaign because it was a last minute decision. But they shocked the Michigan Democratic Party. In less than 3 weeks, even though there were already the Democratic Party anointed candidates, we came in and we flooded the convention, actually scared them. Not because we were rowdy or chanting Free Palestine or anything. No, actually, these students were so helpful, pleasant, helping other people know where to vote, where to go, how to. It wasn't, it wasn't a keffiyeh wearing, flag raising event. It was hundreds and hundreds of young people participating in the democratic process, which is what the Democratic Party always says. We need more people. We need more young people. But because of the corporate, the corporate Dems, as we call them, and the establishment feared the challenge to their position, they worked to really to cheat us out of an election. We were overwhelmingly, and I got the most votes by far, but they said according to their calculations, we lost. Of course, that discouraged some people, but not defeated the people. So the same students organized to then go to the next convention and get themselves elected, which is why in my bio it says, I'm a member of the State Central Committee of the Michigan Democratic Party, because at the last convention, we were elected. And so now agitating from the inside and working to pass a boycott, divestment, sanctions resolution, a resolution calling on the whole state of Michigan, the Democratic Party, to push the whole state of Michigan to support an arms embargo, et cetera. And so this is happening, of course, not just in Michigan, but at other levels. We are seeing people organize to get their states to divest from Israeli bonds. That is happening. We've had a number of wins there. We've had the poll that just came out a few days ago, also in the shifts, showing for the first time in over 21 years, more Americans sympathize with Palestinians than with Israelis, right? It's not a huge, it's like 41% Palestinians to 36 Israelis, but it is huge when you consider that, from 2000 to 2019, the number supporting Israel over Palestine has consistently been like the difference in the double digits, sometimes as high as like 40-point difference between those that support Israel and those that support Palestine. And now those that support Palestine are higher. Now, I think it's even much larger than that, but you still have the older segment of Americans that lean more towards Israel, the younger generation who are on social media more, who are, interacting more, don't rely on the corporate media, see the truth, and they are the future. So that's going to continue to rise and to increase. And then popular culture. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we saw Spike Lee right? Spike Lee at a basketball game wearing a keffiyeh and Palestinian flags. We see Kyrie Irving wearing the press T-shirt that is, respecting and in solidarity with Palestinian journalists. And the shift, the number of people, the thousands really of actors, artists, writers who are declaring that they are boycott Israel, don't want their works, in Israel, and are publicly criticizing these institutions of art that have been silent is increasing, and the wins are really too much to name. Just a couple of weeks ago, though, to show, you had I don't know if some of you had a chance to see Hinds Hall, that documentary, which I haven't myself had a chance to see it, but at a festival where the director Kauthar Ben Hania was being honored at this Cinema for Peace gala in Berlin. She left her award on the stage saying, I refuse to let the deaths of these children become a backdrop for polite speech about peace. And when peace is pursued in a legal and moral, as a legal and moral obligation rooted in accountability, I'm trying to quote her exactly. She said, when peace is pursued as a legal and moral accountability rooted in accountability for genocide, then I will come back and accept it with joy. And at the same time that you had over 80 prominent film professionals and actors that signed an open letter criticizing the Berlin International Film Festival because, of course, they've taken statements, they've been vocal on Ukraine and Iran, but completely silent about Gaza and the genocide. And so, actors, sports figures, writers, all speaking out. If we look around, there's so much happening, and this shift is really, really important. As I mentioned, the narrative transformation. Does this mean we are at liberation? Obviously not. Are the structures of impunity still intact? Yes. But when you have genocide being litigated at The Hague, and you have divestment now in boardrooms because our students and our workers are taking it to their organizations and to their institutions, when you have sanctions and arms embargo being discussed in parliaments, we didn't even get a chance to talk about the churches, but divesting their pension funds, workers conditioning their labor and engaging in strikes, and young people really redefining political coalitions, redefining truth telling, then that solidarity has moved, that not just from being in the streets. And that's what's so important. Being in the streets is only one form of showing our power. It's got to go beyond that, and it is going beyond that. Of course, when a genocide is taking place, it's not moving fast enough, but it is moving. That's unmistakable. And we have to keep it moving, but that requires each and every one of us for sure.
Huwaida, that's, you've really given us a lot to think about. And I'm thinking about two separate categories. The first is all the kind of activities that can and are being done and should be done to move non-violently towards liberation. And the second is all the little successes that are taking place that maybe we're not fully aware of, that are not being highlighted, certainly not in the official press and the television. And so we have a reason to be happy. I just keep thinking about, somebody once said that the difference between violence and non-violence, violence explodes like a bomb. It's immediate, loud, hurtful, destructive, but non-violence is more like a seed that is planted, that slowly grows and becomes big and eventually succeeds. So the idea about nonviolence as a different worldview, as a different method of looking at reality, as a challenge to the ongoing narrative that seems to suppress the message of justice, the message of equality, the message of liberty, the message of freedom. So there is something to be said for nonviolence as a worldview, as a way of looking at things. And that's why I am very pleased that PCAP is hosting you. I think we are close to, we have certainly not anywhere near exhausted the kinds of things that you can tell us, but we want to give people a chance to ask some questions and to engage with you directly, because you are a treasure of information, of excitement, of ideas, and of tactics that we all need to be aware of. So I am going to see whoever is handling the questions, if we can give the participants a chance to address some questions, particularly to Huwaida, about the many issues that she has raised.
Thank you, Jonathan and Huwaida, for that fascinating conversation and really keeping it upbeat, especially with the news that's coming out from the Middle East this morning. There were several questions in the chat, and I kind of grouped them up under specific categories. There have been a couple of questions about the role of Congress, especially with the war power. And the role, there was a question about the role of progressives, and then there was a question about, is it too late to vote in Congress to stop the war with Iran? So maybe like telling us a little bit more about the role of Congress at this point, and the fact that in the Constitution, Congress has the right to declare war. And there was also a question about holding leaders accountable, how leaders that are breaking international law can be held accountable. There's been a question about the power of the ICJ and the ICC, also a question about the ICC and the arrest warrant about issued with regards to Benjamin Netanyahu. So if those kind of two deal with like legal issues and international issues. And so if you would like to address those, and then I can give you the other questions that we've had.
Yeah, take them one at a time. شوية عليها.
Yeah, I don't remember if I know all of them. Gosh, okay. So the first, is it too late to vote? I think when you said too late to vote, I think the question means too late to stop the war now that it has started. No. I mean, they can, they can invoke and enforce the War Powers Resolution Act. And so if Congress passes a resolution directing U.S. forces to withdraw, the president is expected to comply. Now, but our members of Congress have to hear from us. We have to push them this way because we do have war hawks, in Congress. We do have a Republican Party that is largely beholden to Trump, and they currently have the majority. So we do have to put that pressure on our Republican Congress people, but also Democrats, because we see, unfortunately, while more members of Congress are speaking out, we still have people like Chuck Schumer in the Senate or Hakeem Jeffries, who, the minority leader in the House, who are so beholden to the pro-Israel lobby and to AIPAC, and Israel's pushing this war with Iran, that they may not, and they've indicated that they would not support, a war powers resolution or a resolution to rein in the President Trump. And so more, yes, we need to press our Republican members of Congress to vote to support invoking the War Powers Resolution, but also the Democratic members of Congress, who always kind of speak a certain way, but then act in line with, unfortunately, big interests, U.S. and big corporations. So it's not too late, but we do have to raise our voices and mobilize and be sitting and knocking at our representatives' doors. I think one thing I started to say, and I did not really finish because sometimes I go off on different tangents, is the number of people who are running for office now is also incredibly inspiring. And, when I was younger, I always wanted to be a politician or president of the United States, whatever. But then I thought, my activism is never going to get me into power. Now I've become, quote unquote, too radical for the U.S. establishment. But no, when I ran for Congress in 2022, it was specifically to show that someone like me should be able to run for Congress and win because I actually represent the large. I don't represent corporate interests. I represent, the opposite of what the where our country has been going and what actually people do want. They don't want money in politics. They don't want foreign wars. They don't want to be supporting apartheid and genocide. They want money for our communities. All of these things. And though I didn't win, it was a very positive campaign because I was in a pretty conservative district and relatively unknown because I've always worked internationally. And yet I ended up getting a significant portion of the vote, but lost to someone with a lot more, like 40 years of name recognition. Um, but since then, that was 2022, so many more people are stepping up to vote, and that is to run. And that is one of my messages to young people, especially. I know the political establishment that we have, and this duopoly disenfranchises you, and you don't feel like you fit in. And I ran with the Democratic Party not because I'm a fan of the Democratic Party, but that doesn't mean that's what you have to be. There are amazing candidates, incredible. In Michigan, we have Dr. Abdullah Sayed, who's running for Senate, just extremely brilliant and overqualified, and always speaking truth to power. Another young lady who I don't know personally, but I'm just so impressed by her, a Palestinian American, Kat Abu Ghazali in Chicago, phenomenal, running for Congress, and so many more. They're running within the Democratic Party establishment, but sometimes people feel like they have to do that because it's so hard to break out of it. We have third parties, but that haven't been able to gain a foothold. But that doesn't mean that we stop. We work within agitate within, and then also create something on the outside. And the Green Party now is one of the parties that is running candidates across the country. Two off the top of my head, Greg Stoker, who is a former U.S. military, and he was on one of the boats in the flotilla this summer. Also extremely brilliant and articulate and unafraid. Anthony Aguilar, who some of you may have heard of, also former military. He was critical in exposing the sham that was the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that was killing and starving Palestinians in Gaza. He came out and exposed that, and now he's running in North Carolina. But so many more politicians, and unfortunately, it still takes so much money to run because we have so much money in politics. But if you can't donate to a campaign, whatever, $5 here and there, candidates need to raise money because they need to get the word out. So you can volunteer your time, you can door knock, you can phone bank. We don't need the money that the others who were campaigning against all the millions that they spend if we have the people power. So yes, we still need money, but that's not it. That shouldn't hold anybody back from running, and definitely participate. We have to participate because that's a system that we have to change. The policies of our government, electing people who represent us. So there was a lot more about international law that people asked. The cases at the ICJ, I think at ICC, but I didn't get exactly what the questions were because there was so much to say about that. So if you want to clarify, I'm always happy to talk about those. But I want to be on
The
point.
question was about what is the power of the ICJ and the ICC in upholding international law, and then how might nonviolent actions such as flotilla impact these UN laws to enforce UN organs to enforce international law?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there have been historic strides. Obviously, Israel is at the Hague for genocide. The legal processes are we got some very it's hard to say positive in the context that we're in, but rulings from the International Court of Justice on two major areas. There's the Israel case against it's South Africa v. Israel, and that is a case where South Africa is accusing Israel of violating its obligations under the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention is one of the instruments that that Jonathan was talking about post World War II, where the world put in certain kind of safeguards in place so that the horrors of World War II would not be experienced again. One of them being the Genocide Convention, which almost every nation, in the global system is signatory to. But yeah, obviously we don't have countries sticking to them, and Israel is violating their obligation there, and South Africa made a huge political choice to take Israel to The Hague. And they've suffered for it because the US has sanctioned them, of course, but they have stood firm, and that is significant. And though that case will take years before we get a ruling from the International Court of Justice, just because the law moves slowly, it'll take years before we get a decision. But we did get a ruling in January of 2024 that that said that the court found it was plausible that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, and that it ordered Israel to take immediate measures to protect the Palestinian people from genocide. And Israel ignored it. The court then issued 3 more rulings because Israel wasn't abiding by these binding rulings. Israel ignored them. And of course, the United States supported Israel in ignoring them. There is no enforcement mechanism. States are expected to comply, but if they don't comply, things can be taken to the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council, of course, vetoed any attempt to make Israel comply with these binding rulings. But what you do have then is really authoritative decisions saying that genocide is most likely being committed in Gaza, and rulings on what Israel needs to do, and clear violations. And so we can use that in our campaigning when we're going to our institutions about why they should not be complicit, why we need an arms embargo, etc. We can use these rulings, even though there isn't enforcement on the international level. There is taking these rulings and using them to educate and using them to push for measures that we can affect, to boycott and to divest. So I think that those rulings remain important, even though they're being ignored. In the International Criminal Court, yes, we go out and say, why should the United States receive a world leader who is wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes? Like, we should be arresting him. Unfortunately, of course, the US is not doing that. And on top of that, has severely sanctioned the International Criminal Court. So a number of judges are under severe sanctions. We know the UN Special Rapporteur on human rights in the occupied Palestinian territory is under debilitating sanctions. And US sanctions really are debilitating because it's not only on your assets in the United States, but because international banks, because the dollar, it really, the US runs the global banking system, and banks are overly precautious. You get all your credit cards canceled. You can't use the debit cards, your bank accounts, all of these things. It's horrible. And Francesca and these ICC judges are unjustly suffering. It's absolutely horrific and illegal what President Trump's administration has done. Actually, just yesterday or a couple days ago, but I just got the filing yesterday. Francesca's husband and daughter, who is a U.S. citizen, filed a lawsuit against the United States for these sanctions that have completely upended their lives. And so we'll see where that goes. There are challenges to all there. That's important to say. There's civil society, but also legal challenges to all of these measures being put in place to try to stop any kind of accountability. But as it stands today, the International Criminal Court is weakened, unfortunately. Not only by US sanctions, but because of the weakness of Europe. It's sad to say that the European states who, more than the United States, respect the international legal order and actually respect the International Criminal Court, but they have not stood up to defend. That they have not. There's a mechanism within the European system that you can invoke to block US sanctions so that US sanctions won't have an effect in the European system. They have not invoked that. They have let Israeli war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu fly over their airspace to get to the United States and other places. Poland allowed Netanyahu to come in, even though it's signatory to the Rome Convention of the ICC. So there is this attack on international law and the institutions. But I don't think we give up on it. We continue to fight using the mechanisms that we have. We have, for example, so I want to give you the bad with the good. We have the Hind Rajab Foundation, right? The Hind Rajab Foundation is, yes, it's filing things at the ICC, but more importantly, they're tracking Israeli soldiers, Israeli war criminals, and trying to use domestic legislation in these different countries, because many countries around the world, the US also, but unfortunately, the US doesn't respect it, have domestic legislation to prevent war crimes and crimes against humanity. It's called universal jurisdiction. And in some of these states where Israeli soldiers that are on record committing crimes are going, they are being chased. There's almost no one, nowhere an Israeli soldier can go that they are not being chased, both by civil society saying we don't, want war criminals here, but also by what the Hind Rajab Foundation is doing by filing petitions and requests for their arrest in the countries that have more vibrant, I would say, kind of enforcement of their anti-genocide, anti-war crimes legislation at home. So we can still use the law, and lawyers are still fighting, but even where it looks like it's failing, let's still use what we have to campaign so that our institutions are not complicit and that people around the world know, our neighbors know what's happening and why they also need to speak up. If there's anyone that wants any more specifics about any of the rulings, because there is that genocide one, there's a July 2024 one, I'll just mention briefly. In July 2024, the UN General Assembly asked the International Court of Justice for an opinion. Now, people will tell you, oh, it's a non-binding opinion. Those who want to make excuses, or Israel apologists will tell you it's a non-binding opinion. But that's not true. It is very binding. When we say binding or not binding, binding is when it comes as a result of a contentious case between two states. So South Africa took Israel to the ICJ. That is a contentious case between two states. The rulings are binding on the parties. In this case that I'm talking about now, there are not two parties before the court. The UN General Assembly asked the International Court of Justice to tell them what does the state of the law say about Israeli occupation, because Israeli occupation in general is actually not illegal. But the question to the court was, what is the effect of Israel's prolonged occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, etc. And so you don't have two parties there, but when you have the highest court in the world that is telling you what the state of international law is, that is binding, because that is what international law says. And what they said, a lot of great things. You should read that ruling. But one of the most important for me, which countries try to avoid, especially the United States, when they say that we should not be boycotting, or Palestinians should submit to a peace process, etc. They use this peace process, two-state solution jargon in order to kind of delegitimize what we're talking about here, which is taking nonviolent actions in different ways to hold Israel accountable. You'll hear people tell you that's not helpful, peace process. The International Court of Justice said that Palestinians are entitled to self-determination yesterday. Like, Israel is violating Palestinians' fundamental right to self-determination. They are entitled to it now, and it does not depend on any kind of peace process. So you can't use the peace process to prolong granting Palestinian self-determination. And Palestinian freedom and self-determination is not contingent upon restrictions or conditions that are put on it by the occupier. So they shouldn't have to jump through hoops. Right. And that is one of the dangerous things, what we saw, unfortunately, in November of 2025. We saw the UN Security Council adopt Trump's 20-point peace plan that did not talk about Palestinian freedom, that had all of these points that really were conditions on Palestinians, that have Palestinians jumping through hoops in order to maybe get to a point to someday talk about being partially free. It is such an affront to everything that the global international legal system should stand for and what the UN system has been building. So for the UN Security Council to pass this and now declare that this is a form of like international law is an atrocity. It is, I think, one of the greatest betrayal of the UN system of Palestinians in decades. But again, this is where our those that are ruling, we have Trump and Netanyahu, Israel, the United States, that are leading us this way, and we have the weakness of Europe and other countries that are failing to kind of stop it in any way. And so again, it comes back to us.
Huwaida, let's see if there's any additional questions while we still have time.
There was a question about the BDS, the challenges to BDS bans in several states in the United States. Can you say something about that?
Yes, unfortunately, there are about what latest count, maybe about 35 US states that have enacted some form of restrictions on boycott, divestment, sanctions. Like if you support the BDS movement, then you may be subjected to some kind of sanctions. It is, we have one in Michigan, for example. But and we would be ready to challenge it in Michigan if it ever applied. But some of in a lot of states, it's just kind of on the books. It hasn't applied anywhere. In some of the places where it has applied, it's been challenged legally, and the laws have failed to stand up to constitutional scrutiny. So in the places where these laws have been challenged, we have won. And so I would say that they exist. Don't let that stop you. If you can push your members of the state legislatures to overturn them, that would be great. But if there is somebody that is affected by them, then I would contact. If you know somebody that is affected by them, then I would you can let me know. I'll reach out to others. But some of the legal outfits that have been part of challenging this, we have the National Lawyers Guild, CARE, a co-sponsor of this webinar, and other attorneys who have stepped up to challenge these laws and win. So unfortunately, because a lot of our politicians are still bought out by the pro-Israel lobby, we do have a lot of US states that have these laws, but they have not, I don't see that they've really had kind of an impact. And we're waiting for the opportunity to challenge them where you actually have a plaintiff that is affected by them.
Great, thank you for that. And I guess as we're winding up, maybe it'll be a good time for us to tell us there was something about where to get honest reporting about the Middle East. Sources of some people in the chat mentioned drop site news. Some people mentioned the electronic intifada. So do you have other sources for people to go and get news?
Drop site news is fabulous. Also, Electronic Intifada has been doing critical work for about over 2 decades now. Breaking Point is another one I listen to all the time. Democracy Now! I always joke that Democracy Now! Amy Goodman says she has a war and peace report. I'm like, where's the peace? It's just like a war report. It's all every morning. It's just more and more atrocities. Um, but Democracy Now! Breaking Point is really good. Drop site news. I think there's also the Gray Zone. I follow them a lot less, but there's a lot of independent outfits providing news and analysis on social media, so you don't even have to go turn to your mainstream corporate media that's bought out these days. Those are some of the ones if you like to listen. Of course, also so many websites for maybe we can provide a list because there'd be too many for me to try to recall right now. But this is one of the great things in that you have this also explosion of incredible kind of research and analysis and information that is put out there for activists to use.
Thank you for that. And then if you were to tell people three things to do in their local community, what would you recommend people do in their local communities?
It starts, I think, with making sure that, or trying to education, right? Does your neighbor know about what's happening? Do they care? What avenues do you have to spread information locally? Because local, I think, is international is great, but it all comes back local. If the international actions don't impact locally, then we're doing something wrong. But there are a lot of one of the strongest things I think that we have been doing again for decades is connecting struggles because we're all worried about certain things. There are dozens of issues that I care about. Of course, there's a hierarchy of where you put your time just because we only have so much time in the day. But connecting where you can. Right now, we see the violence of ICE in our streets. Are you participating in these efforts to protect our communities that are being targeted because of their skin color or their citizenship status? So, making sure that locally also we're there for issues that our local communities care about and make sure that, tying Palestine into that and seeing so people can see the connections. One of the things when I was going door to door campaigning right? Nobody really in my district cares much or knows much about Palestine. And that's where I had devoted a lot of my time before running for office. But I could always connect with every person at every door that I was at because it was easy to make those connections about where our money was going and it's being deprived, depriving our community here, what the correlations are between the violence and the militarization of our police. So the issues that affect the local community, are we there also to make those connections and to make sure that we're supporting them so that they can also support us? And, when we're calling our members of Congress, all of these issues are intertwined. And I think the last thing I would say is making sure that education is one thing that's great, but we need to turn that education into action. And so I always say, call your member of Congress, show up at their door, um, eh, meetings with them. So you're taking this knowledge and you're turning it into political pressure. So it's a easy thing to do every day, to pick up the phone. It takes less than 5 minutes probably to call all your elected representatives and let them know that, well, first and foremost, here we're talking about genocide and stop arming genocide and apartheid, but also the other issues that we care about. So educate your neighbors, participate in the be at the other organizing events for issues that we care about that are impacting our community and make those connections, and then make sure that your elected representatives are hearing you.
Right. And then finally, a link to those who want to support the flotilla. And also, I think there was something about somebody mentioned going to your website and finding like inactive, like something about the website link being broken. So I'm wondering if
Um,
that's an issue.
I don't, the link I'm putting in now is just an email that we put out. So it's a MailChimp, but it has links in it to the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. It has links to US boats, and it has links to endorse. It has links to donate. So I don't think any of those, if you could tell me what link might be broken. So this link that I just put in is to a letter that we put out that has links to donate and to learn more. But I don't know. Oh, I see Mazen's message. Mazen, good to know you're here. Do you have any more information about which link is not working?
I can't find it because the chat is kind of like all
I
over the
know
place.
it's a lot. I'm happy to, I'm going to put my,
It's David Benedict who said that. I went to your US Boats to Gaza endorsement site to click the endorsement form, but got the message this account was deleted because of inactivity.
that's weird. I see someone else saying the link worked for them. I put my email in the chat. If Yeah, I see others saying it's working, so maybe it's the browser or something.
Okay.
But I did put my email in the chat if someone continues to have problems or needs to reach me about
Yeah,
anything else.
I think it's important.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for spending part of your day with us. And thank you, Jonathan, for leading such a fascinating conversation. And I'm glad that we're kind of left with a little bit of hope. Like I don't want to be too optimistic,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Oh, we have to. We absolutely have to. Quickly, two quick things. Someone I saw noted, I haven't been looking at the chat, but someone just noted that Dr. Mazen Kumsiya it just completely baffles me how he manages to do all he does, but he does have an email list of tens of thousands of people and usually does a roundup of a lot of incredible stuff that's going on. So definitely get on his email list. But just, really briefly, just to show that I'm not just being kind of a hyperbolic or naive. When the last boat that I was on was in October, and my daughter, who was turning 11, she was born on October 7th. So she's an October 7th baby. And I was going to be on the boat during her birthday, and she was hysterical about it. And she said she's never going to forgive me. And if I die, she's going to lock herself in her room and never come out. Um, in having kind of this honest conversation with her, one of the things I told her is obviously I'm going to try very hard to come home and not die. But it's true that I'm missing her birthday, but honestly, I think that me being on this boat or doing what I can is the best present that I could give to her, because I don't want her growing up in a world where you could see children deliberately starve to death or blown to pieces and not do anything. I don't want it to be a world where people don't do anything. So I do believe there's hope. I really do.
Well, thank you for that. And now Reverend Alex will lead us in a prayer, closing prayer. Reverend Alex.
Reverend, you're muted. Oh, someone needs to unmute
Unmute
him.
yourself. Ah,
Can you hear me now? All right, good. Well, before I pray, I just want to encourage all of you to know that PCAP, Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace, is willing to help in any way possible if your church needs a speaker, or if your conference needs a speaker, or if you have a group in your town that needs a speaker. We have in PCAP men and women, Palestinian Christian men and women, who will be very, very happy to come and share and teach about the situation in the Middle East and the situation also about Christians in the Holy Land. So feel free to connect with PCAP, and let's know that we have friends all over. Let's go to God in prayer. Almighty God, we thank you because you are a God of peace. You are a God of justice. You are the God who gives us hope, even in dark moments of our existence. I thank you, Lord, for the witness of Huwaida Arraf and the witness of Jonathan Kuttab, also the witness of Pikab and the witness of Fazna, who are day and night working to teach people about your peace and your justice. I thank you for all the people who connected to this webinar. And I pray, Lord, as we leave today, inspire us to do what is right, what is good, in order to bring your peace to our planet. We especially pray for Iran in this moment and the people of Iran, and also the people throughout the Middle East. I pray that the Israelis will not take this opportunity of war in Iran to put more pressure and injustice against the people in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. And Lord, I pray that you will frustrate the evil plans of Netanyahu and of Trump. May they not succeed in what they are doing. Lord, we pray that your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Huwaida. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much to you guys, to everyone that tuned in. Appreciate it. Now we get out and protest the war in Iran.
Right.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.